You do this quite a lot, don't you?
I don't know, I don't remember.
Yes, you do. I know you do.
Yeah, sometimes. I never know what to say, so it will be easy.
How did you enjoy it?
Comunque
I never enjoy it.
apriglielo le mandate massime.
But I do it, I guess I'm a masochist.
Why? I mean, really, in that case, why do people? I mean, frankly, a lot of people say that they don't like doing it, but then they do it. So, why do you do it?
Because they tell me that it's good for the movie. So what I would do anything to help the movie, you know. So, no, because, you know, for me it's always sort of, the work should speak for itself, you know. That's okay.
Do you watch interviews with people?
Huh?
Do you watch ever
Interviews with people?
on TV or?
I do, and that's why I don't like to do it, because I find it very embarrassing, because, you know, usually all these interviews is all either self-promoting or asking, kissing asses of other people, and, you know, it's,
You're not an ass kisser, are you?
so, no, it's,
Are you going to be kissing ass tonight, or are we going to hear some sort of like
Okay.
some stuff?
I don't know. No, we'll see. It's,
Because basically, you're promoting Gore's Ghost. Essentially.
yeah, but we don't have to talk about that.
We will some of them, because I believe we're doing some of the questions on Gore's Ghost may well be used for the DVD.
Okay.
Italian edition. So, I don't know how much you approve of special extras on DVDs either, but
We'll see.
we'll see. Yeah. I'm Apostle. Are you Apostle? Are you set? All right.
You'll find out.
I'll find out. Okay, it's a big adventure. So I got to sit over here like this. Have you ever interviewed people? I mean casting. I mean just in this situation. Have you ever done this?
For a television, like
For
something.
any reason whatsoever.
Well, you interview people for the casting. You know, that's all. But not for. No, I don't do it for television. No. I was doing it when I was a student at the Czech Communist television, but then everything had to be written beforehand. Even the spontaneous interviews had to be written beforehand, and then send it to the censors. Censors, you know, had to approve, and then the whole spontaneous interview had to go verbatim what you learned, what was approved by censors. So, then if you, no way. Because in that times, television was only live. There was no way to, it was no Ampex or, you know, tape, nothing like that. So whatever you said went in the air, you know. And I'll tell you, it was ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I was interviewing, well, I was told to interview a top communist official who just came back from Moscow, where they were celebrating some, I don't know what. And so they told me, you have to make an interview with him. So I wrote a few questions, sent it to them, to him, and expecting answers, and which I have to send to the censors. But the answers were not coming. So it's at the day of the, when it's supposed to be on the air, I told my boss, you know, what should I do? I said, write the answer for him and send it to them and send it to him, send them to him, and he has to learn it. Okay, so I wrote answers, send it to him, and send it to censors first. They approved, so send it to him, and then the red light goes on and it goes live in the air, you know. And I said, Comrade Hamula, you just came back from Soviet Union. Where, which city you visited? Moscow, Leningrad, Kiev. Oh, and how were you accepted? And he was reading the answers I gave him on a spontaneous interview, you know. So this was the absurdity of you know, this kind of television at those times.
Milos Forman, good evening.
Good evening.
I believe you first started as a screenplay writer and then moved to direction.
Well, I started to study. Well, I didn't have much choice because I wanted to enter the university to study the theater direction, and I was not accepted, and so I applied to whatever was left to apply in September, and it was film school for the screenwriting, and I was accepted, and of course then 4 years at the school was enough for me to fall in love with the movies, because you see endless movies and you talk till 5 in the morning, in the local pub with all the college students, and so then when I graduated, I wrote about 2 screenplays which were made by other directors, and I became disillusioned, because not that the films were bad or better or what I thought, but they were different. They were different. So I tried to direct them myself, the next screenplay, and that's how I ended up directing movies.
Which school were you at?
I was at the FAMU, which is a film academy in Prague, the Academy of Musical Arts, at the University of Prague.
Was there a lot of competition to get into a school like that, like there is now? Or
What?
was there a lot of competition? Was it hard to get into a school like that?
Well, it was, I don't know how, the school was sort of, there were a lot of people wanted to enter the school because, to be a filmmaker for a young man was something very noble and very desirable. But, of course, in Czechoslovakia, a country of, in then, 14 million people only speak the language, so you couldn't make, hundreds of films a year. So it was not, it was quite a lot of people who applied and only few who ended up there. The dramaturgy, which was screenwriting, was probably the easiest to get in because it was not as glamorous as a director or a cameraman or producer, So I got there. I got in the screenwriting division.
And which year are we talking about, and what was the political climate like?
I entered the school in 1950 and I graduated in 1955, which was probably the most hard, left-wing communist kind of period in Czechoslovakia. But in that, like for example, you must realize before the war in Czechoslovakia, around 30 full-length features were made for the country of 14 million people. After the communists took over in 1948, in the 50s, 2 or 3 films were made. That was all. And yet the school was producing graduates, And that was very interesting because, every year 3, 4 new student directors, came out of the school. So around 1960, when Khrushchev denounced Stalin, and a little bit of Thaw became relevant. So suddenly we were like 30, 40 young filmmakers without work, standing in front of the doors of the Barrandov studio, wanted to work, And so when finally Khrushchev declared that we have to give some opportunities to young people, we have to trust them, the door opened a little bit and we all just went in. So suddenly we were like, we started like 15, 20 new filmmakers in, the early 60s. And so, that was when Vera Chytilova started, Jan Němec, I did, Ivan Páser, Jaromil Jireš, Ewald Schorm, a lot of, and all these films were immediately, of course, under very harsh scrutiny of the old-timers, old-time communist censors, and but what saved us was international film festivals. Because suddenly the scouts for the film festivals in Locarno, in Venice, in Cannes, in the New York Film Festival came and chose these films, our films. So it was not as easy to ban them and to put them, on the side. And that's how the Czech, so-called Czech New Wave survived.
While you were at film school, what kind of films, which were they showing American films or government-approved films?
When you were in school, we have seen a lot of films, which was wonderful because that was the main source of information to watch movies. Mostly, we were, of course, fed with the new Soviet movies and films from communist countries, but also the companies from all over the world were still sending to the Czech film export, offering them buy films. And sometimes these films ended up at school being screened only for the students. So we saw not much American movies. That was almost no-no. But we saw Italian movies. We saw French movies. We saw South American movies, Mexican movies, And that was very, very inspiring.
I mean, you make it sound like a very restrictive environment, which I imagine it was. But now, and you say that festivals, European festivals, were beginning to call you. So were you given the opportunity to leave Czechoslovakia to follow a film to a festival abroad or not?
One of the paradoxes of the communist society was that as much as they scorned and, the capitalist society and the decadence of this society, they admired any success in that society of our work. They just loved it, not only for the national pride, but mainly for the money, because they needed hard currency, the communist countries. So if the film was successful at the festival, the foreign country were buying the films, and they paid in a hard currency, So that was, and of course the festivals were asking to bring the filmmakers to the festival. So fine, so that was the only way how to travel in the time for us. Like for example, I was at the Locarno Film Festival, I was at the Cannes Film Festival, at the Venice Film Festival, and that was very, very interesting, and because we could see suddenly, other films, and we could talk to other young filmmakers from all over the world, So,
what was that experience like for you? To be exposed to?
Well, the irony of the time is that, for example, my language. I didn't speak any foreign languages. None of us did really, because when communists took over, so English language was scratched from the curriculum. But it was, strangely enough, it was for me much more interesting to go and buy some stuff like I couldn't get in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, to buy books by Avedon, photograph books by Avedon, or to buy nylon stockings for my girlfriend, That was the main interest when I was outside, and it was very interesting. I remember here in Venice, yeah. In Venice, my film was at a festival in the 60s, Loves of a Blonde. And the buzz was that it had a chance for some award, So I got sort of excited. And then the award evening came, and I didn't get any award. And then I learned that the Soviet member of the jury, said to some other members of the jury that if they would, reward this Czech film, he would take his own film out of the competition. Because our films, Czech films, were considered much more sort of free expression-wise than the Soviet films. And they wouldn't, they couldn't possibly allow that the Czech film would get an award and Soviet film wouldn't get an award. So there was a lot of politics and manipulation, behind the scenes. But we didn't care, because that 1 week in Venice was, that was the biggest award I could get.
Was your work in Czechoslovakia financed within Czechoslovakia, or did you get production or producers coming and?
No, the film, the Czech films were financed only by the Czech government, and they were, owned by the Czech government, and the Czech government could do whatever they wanted with it. But after the success of Love's Were Blonde, there came an offer from Italy, from Carlo Ponti, to co-produce my next movie, which was Fireman's Ball. And he invested $65,000 in that film, which was peanuts, really, it's for him. And so I was very happy, and I thought, my God, I'm very smart because, yeah, here is the screenplay, but now I can make the film the way I really want because Carlo Ponti, they will not tell Carlo Ponti you have to censor this line or cut this line. They wouldn't dare to do that, so I'm smart, right? Well, I was not smart because when Carlo Ponti saw the film, he disliked the film very, very much and asked to be given the money back. And I was in big trouble because in that times, if you pay any $1 to the Czech government, that dollar next day is not there. He's immediately in Moscow in the bank which finances all the spy network all over the world for the communists, So I got a letter, official letter, that I will be sued. I will be sued for sabotage of socialist economy, which in that times represented 10 years in prison, So I visited Carlo Ponti in London, and I said, listen, if you will insist that we have to pay you back, that Czech government has to pay you back, I will go to prison for 10 years. And he said, oh, no, I didn't know that. That's terrible. Of course, I'll take care of that. So I'm calling the film export back and say, everything is all right. Carlo Ponti will not ask for the money back, The next day, film export is calling me and says, what are you talking about? We just talked to Carlo Ponti. He wants his money back. So I panicked and I showed the film. I was told and showed the film to François Truffaut and Claude Berry. And they bought the film, reimbursed Carlo Ponti, so he got his money. So I didn't have to go to prison for 10 years because Truffaut and Berry, saved my ass.
Why did you leave Czechoslovakia?
Because of this film, Fireman's Ball, because that was the film which was made in 1967, and when the communist censors saw the film, they didn't dare to make a verdict, and they sent the film to the Politburo of the party to look at it. And I was told, I was not there, of course. They showed the film to the Politburo, and afterwards I was told that after the film, when the film finished, that the president Novotny, who was also the first secretary of the party, he climbed the wall. And he was just expressing the greatest disgust, about the film. And the film was officially banned. In that time, I already had because then Dubček era, meanwhile, started, and I had a contract to try to make a film in the United States. So I was in the United States making a film, and then the Russians came to Czechoslovakia, and I learned that this film, my film, was officially banned forever. So it was clear to me that if I go back to Czechoslovakia, I will not be able to make movies anymore, and I would probably end up, digging somewhere, in the fields or in the coal mines or something like that. So I just didn't go back because I knew that I wouldn't be able to work.
Did you have to claim any kind of political asylum, or was it just you could stay in America and never go back?
No, I was in the United States, and I immediately asked for the so-called green card, so they can stay in the United States and work there, And it was also very interesting because my visa were expiring, one day, and about 2 weeks before the visa expired, I was called into the office of the immigration officer, and he told me, Mr. Fuhrman, we are not going to give you a green card. You will be deported. I said, why? Because you lied to us. So I lied to you? yeah, you said that you were never a member of Communist Party. I said, well, I don't know what you know. All I know is that I was never a member of any political party, least of all Communist political party. Sorry. So, I am going to be. So I mentioned this, deported. So I mentioned this to a friend of mine who was in my first American movie, Buck Henry, and he talked to Paddy Chayefsky and Mike Nichols and Schaffner and Sidney Lumet and a few other directors, and they wrote a letter, a strong letter, to the immigration office, to reverse their opinion, their decision. So they gave me extension of staying without being deported for 3 months or whatever. One day, finally, the same official, the same bureaucrat, called me in the office 3 months later and said, Mr. Foreman, I'm very happy to inform you that you were never a member of Communist Party. Oh, great. So what happened was that, of course, Americans, they have their informers in the communist countries. If they want to know something, so, they check with them. But they are so naive. They don't realize that 90% of these informers are really serving KGB or STB, So when they asked their informer if I was ever a member of Communist Party, the Czechs wanted me back to put me in prison. So they said, yes, he was a member of the Communist Party because they knew that Americans will expel me. So that's how they got the information that I was a member of the Communist Party. Then when all the American directors, were trying to save me, so they asked again through some other channels, and then they learned that I was telling the truth. So that saved my life, my career, I mean.
Your first American film is Taking Off.
The first American film I made was Taking Off, which was a film which I tried to make the same way I did my film in Czechoslovakia. I love that movie. I'm very proud of that movie, but the fact is that it was total flop. Nobody went to see it. Very good critics, very good reviews, but nobody came to see it because Americans are, it was typically European kind of a film with open end, which is not what American audience like. They like black and white. So who is the good guy and who is the bad guy? My God, what should what do you try to saying to me, So that was a flop. So I was doing this film in the United States still with valid exit visa, But when the film was a total flop, and knowing that my film was banned forever in Czechoslovakia, The Fireman's Ball, so I said, no, I'm not going there. I will. So I wrote a very nice letter to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that I would like them to extend my exit visa so I can try to make another film. Because, first of all, I didn't want to come back as a loser. If I got an Oscar, then communists would probably applaud me. But if I came as a loser, if I made something in the West and it didn't work, oh, then I am dead for them, So, and they sent me, yes, sure, we give you exit visa. Come back and we'll give it to you in Prague. I knew what it meant. I would never be allowed to go out again. So I wrote them, listen, you have the same stamp at the embassy in Washington, and I don't even have money to go back. I didn't make any, not a penny with the film. And they wrote me back that I'm fired. So they decided my fate. That's when I realized, I have to stay. So I became immigrant basically against my will. But today I'm very happy I did.
I mean, regardless of its box office success, how do you feel now about Taking Off?
Oh, I like that film very much. But it's my private, it was my, I can't really judge my films as movies. I can judge them as a part of my life experience. No director can see their own movies. We don't see the movies the way the audience sees the movies. For one simple reason, that I always know exactly what's coming next. And, that's very important for the perception of the movie, to be sucked into the story without knowing, So I'm very, very, very happy about that film, but I understand that it's. But during that film, I met so many wonderful people which were very helpful, for my career later. Like Michael Haussman, the producer. Some actors like Vinny Schiavelli and, Buck Henry and then others.
Sitting in that chair, both Sidney Lumet and David Lynch talked extensively about luck and fate having working in their career, without which they felt they wouldn't have got anywhere. With that in mind, how did you get to do One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest?
Well, it's true that I don't know if I believe in fate, but I certainly believe in luck. You have to be lucky in some way. My luck started really with Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas in 1962 bought a rights to a book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And he wanted to play the McMurphy, make a big Hollywood film, and play it, And no one studio wanted to finance it. And he was at the top of his fame, Kirk Douglas. Because, they asked the computer, look, film is about mental illness. How many films about mental illness were made and how many were successful? Well, computer told him something like, 70 films were made and only one made money. So they didn't want to finance it. So Kirk Douglas decided, okay, let's turn the book into a play and I will play it on Broadway for the first time. Kirk Douglas, a huge megastar of Hollywood on Broadway. Great, they did. After, 4 months, the play closed. The audience just were not comfortable to see mental, patients on the screen, on the stage. Before Kirk Douglas, when Kennedy was still alive, was asked by President Kennedy to go on goodwill tour in communist countries. He turned it down because he thought that the play will be running, for 3 years. Now suddenly he was, out with all the time on his hands. So he said, Kennedy was already dead, but he said, okay, I will go. And he came to Prague. They showed him some films. Among them, Loves of a Blonde, they showed him. There was a small party. He came to me and said, may I send you a book? And you read it, and you tell me if you'd be interested to make a movie with me. And I said, of course, my God. I was a young filmmaker in Czechoslovakia, and Kirk Douglas comes. So, okay, I am waiting practically every day at, at the mailbox, postman to come, mailman to come. The book never came. 10 years later, I'm already living in the United States, and I am lying in my bed at Chelsea Hotel, not knowing what to do. Envelope comes, and there is a book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, sent to me by Michael Douglas and Saul Zaentz, Well, I read the book. I realized it's the most wonderful piece of literature I read in a long, long time. So I said, yes, I want to do it. Then only I found out what happened. I met with Kirk Douglas, and he says, you son of a gun, I sent you a book and you don't even have a courtesy to tell me to shove it, And I said, the same thing I thought about you, Kirk. You just turn young filmmakers' head around, you leave the room, and in that moment you forgot about it. What happened was that he really sent the book. But the censors at the border, confiscated the book and didn't tell him and didn't tell me. And 10 years later, the same book is coming to me from Kirk Douglas's son, Michael, who didn't know that 10 years earlier, Kirk was sending me the same book. So I guess there must be some kind of a strange fate involved, or luck, or whatever it is, And that's how this project went ahead.
What was it that made you want to do it, apart from the fact that it was the Douglas family insisting?
When I read the book, I suddenly realized, my God, are they so smart to know that this book is about my country? This book is about life I lived in communist country. Communist Party was my big nurse. telling me what to do, telling me what to say, telling me what to think, behave the way they, want me to. I knew what this book is about. And it was very, very, and the end of the book, that was the dream of every young man in communist Czechoslovakia, to grab something and throw it through the barbed wire at the border and go and look at the world, because we were there living like in the zoo, behind the bars, and there is outside world there which we didn't know about. So that ending of the book was, it was dream of every communist young man. So there was no question for me to say yes. I know what this book is about. I want to do it.
So for you, is the film about McMurphy or about, I forget his name, the Indian character?
Bromden, the Indian. Well, look. There was a problem with Kankisi, who was the writer, whom I admire. I never met him. I admire his writing, but I never met him because when I joined the project, the producers and Kankisi were already on non-speaking terms. Because the book is written from the point of view of the Indian, of the schizophrenic Indian, of the sick Indian, and the scenes, like for example, big nurse touches the wall and blood starts to see oozing out of the walls. There is a vapor coming out of big nurse's nostrils, and wires sticking out of her hair, and all kind of very surrealistic images, And I said, no, this is not the way I want to do it. And the producers, agreed with me. I want this to be a very real, because then it will be very strong, and I want in the end to be very important, but just another, character in the story, and that's what I did. And Kankisi didn't. He said that he will never see the film, and he died. And I don't know if he ever saw it or not. Some people say yes, he saw it. The fact is that it's when the film got all the Oscars. I know that because I was the only one who thanked him publicly at the Oscars, and I know that he was happy about that. At least, this bastard Foreman thanked me.
How important was winning the Oscar for you as a vindication of what you'd chosen to do?
I was quite new in the United States, so I didn't know how really important the Oscars are. I knew that they are very important that one evening because everybody is watching the show, yeah. But then I slowly realized it's very important. It's very important for one, not only for your ego, because that's not so important, that it massages your ego. But it's very important because your price goes up. And with the money comes freedom. In Hollywood, money gives you freedom. And from that point of view, it's very, very important.
So with the newfound freedom, you made Hair.
Then I made Hair in the... That's a strange story because I was in New York in 1967 when a friend of mine said, listen, there is a preview of some new musical, let's go see it. And it was the very first public preview of Hair off-Broadway. I didn't speak English in the times, I was there, I think, for the New York Film Festival or something like that. And I just loved every song. I didn't understand what is it about, what are they singing, but every song was a jam, which I know only West Side Story is the same kind of musical. Every song is a jam. Usually you have musicals and you have 1, 2, or 3 melodies, and the rest is just, more or less fill the time. And I went after Jimmy and Jerry if I could take the music sheets with me to Prague. And I found out, to my surprise, that they knew my film. They knew the Loves Were Blonde. And, so great. And I told them, if you will want to make a movie out of this musical one day, I would love to do that. And they did. They wanted, but they were funny guys. When I was already 71, when I was already in the United States living, so I visited them, and in Los Angeles, because they were playing in Hair, in the stage production, on stage, and we sat down and I told them the way I would like to make the movie, how, and then they called somebody, and this big black guy, they called him Earl, came, sat down and started to play tarot cards. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, he looked at Jimmy and Jerry like that and did. And that was it. Not yet in the stars, not yet in the stars. So that was it. But then, so I made Taking Off, and then I made Cuckoo's Nest. And then they came to me if I am still interested to do Hair. I said, of course I am. Of course I am. So it was 1976. So I wrote, I sat down, it was United Artists, and tried to work on the script with Michael Weller. And when we finished the script, I sent it to the United Artists, to the company. And I sent also, out of courtesy, of course, to Jimmy and Jerry. Oh my God, they were furious. They didn't like the script at all.
Just out of interest, why was Hair shot during autumn and winter?
Why?
Yeah.
The funniest thing was that when I saw the schedule, that this big Be-In, which is, like in Central Park, thousands of people, so, hippies, all that was scheduled for December 6th. December 6th, it's winter. No, Milos, don't worry. That's Indian summer in that time in New York. And it's beautiful, it's great weather always, and, people will come. So December 6th in the morning, I wake up and there is a snow in Central Park. It's covered with snow. It was the funniest thing because, I see we should have hundreds of, thousands of hippies there. And there is like 50 extras shivering, around this barrel with hot coal. And I go downstairs and the production manager, is sleeves rolled up and hair standing, blue lips. So Milos, where do you want the camera? I said, what do you want? What are you talking about? You want to shoot it? Yeah, the jet engines are on the way, and they will melt the snow within 100 yards. Oh yeah? And what about the vapor? The singers and the actors? You talk and there's a vapor coming. Don't worry, it's taken care of. You put the dancers in the mouth, ice cubes, and when you say action, they spit the ice cubes out, and for 6 seconds, there will be no vapor. I said, no, come on. So I called the United Artists people, and they understood it's ridiculous to do that. But what was very interesting is the mentality. Because then I in Hollywood, to shoot summer in summer, that's not art. Yeah, to shoot summer in winter, that's art, man. That's art, So, no, then we had to shoot it next spring, and it was all right finally. But the situation with the screenplay was the same as was with Ken Kesey. When the boys sent me the script, it was another version of the play. It was unfilmable. So again, I alienated the authors, the original authors. They refused to see the film. The same as Ken Kesey refused to see Cuckoo's Nest, the film.
You follow the Ragtime, which brought James Cagney out of retirement.
Ragtime was another example of writers who mistrust the movies very much, E.L. Doctorow, he wrote a screenplay. No, that was a screenplay for a 10-hour-long film or 1-hour-long series for television, So when I wrote a screenplay concentrating on a certain part of the book, he didn't like it at all. I don't know if he saw the film ever or not, but he didn't like it at all. And now Dino De Laurentiis came that we need at least 1 star, at least 1 star, and to pre-sell the film in Europe mainly and like that. And so it was, I had a cast already and I liked the cast. And so I asked Jack Nicholson to be in it and play a small part, a cameo, to play the Hurricane Thor. But 3 weeks before the shooting, the message came that he can't do it for whatever reasons. I like Jack, so I didn't even, ask why. And so what? And at that time, I met socially James Cagney at a dinner nearby where he lives in New York, upstate New York. And he didn't work for 20 years. 20 years he was not standing. And again, here we are talking about luck and fate. In that times, he invited me to visit him in his house. I went to see him. 2 weeks later, he forgot who I am. He asked me, what are you doing? I said, I'm a film director. Any movie I might have seen. That my latest film is called Hair. He looked at me. And I must tell you first that in his house you wouldn't find nothing from the memorabilia. No posters, not even the statue of Oscar. Nothing, no photographs, nothing. So I said, I made Hair. He looked at me, he went to the cupboard, he's bringing me something and says, I never saw it. I never had a desire to see it. I don't know who gave it to me. I don't know why I kept it here, but now I am giving it to you. And this is in 1979. This was a poster from the very first off-Broadway production of Hair, which I saw in 1967. So how did that poster get there? He didn't have any idea. And in that moment, Marge Zimmerman, his caretaker, said, James, that's an omen. You have to do Miloš's film, because the doctors are telling you that if you will not get your ass out of this chair, you will die. And this is an omen. This is telling you that you have to do this movie. And he said, oh, okay, all right, I'll do it if I will not have to sign, but I will not sign any contract. And I want to change my mind, I have a right to change my mind 3 days before my shooting starts. So I went to Dino De Laurentiis, the producer, and I told him, James is a big star, so we have a star. But he will not sign any contract, which was all right with Dino, because he asked anyway to be paid for scale, and anyway the money went to the charity, so that was fine. But I didn't dare to tell Dino that he has a right. I promised him the right to change his mind 3 days before shooting. So, and his scenes are in London. James Cagney never flew in the airplane. He would never flew in the airplane. So we had to put him on Queen Elizabeth II, to bring him to London with his family, with his wife. And now I am nervous, so what about if he changes his mind? So I found a stand-in for him. He could step in, but that would be a disaster for Dino, because we would lose the name, right? What happened was, and again, it's a good luck, I knew that he's getting more and more nervous, because that man, he was 81 years old. He was very sick. He was sciatica. He couldn't hear. He couldn't walk. He couldn't remember things and like that. And I knew that he's getting more and more nervous. So I told him, listen, come and see. I'm rehearsing today the scene with some British extras, Pinkertons. Come on the set, just like that. And so he came, and I had like 100 extras, British actors on the set. When he appeared in the door, all these British actors and extras started to applaud. And they are applauding 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And James Cagney is standing there, and tears are coming down his cheeks. And he turns to me and says, I'll do the film. Yes, I'll do the film. I'm sure if this didn't happen, he would suddenly panic and said, no, I'm sorry, I can't do it. But this made him, and he saw the love of Europeans, to his work and to him. He said, I'll do the film. So that's how it happened.
So when he went on to make Amadeus, it was another adaptation of Peter Schaffer's theatre play.
Well, with Amadeus, it was a different story because Peter Schaffer, that's when luck comes in play. Peter Schaffer, practically all of his plays, except one or two, were made into movies in England. And he was always very unhappy with the result. So when they came him to make a film out of Equus, he said, okay, but I will write the screenplay. And he did. And when he saw the film, he was again very unhappy. So when I sat down with him to make a film out of Amadeus, I told him, Peter, listen, it's, you didn't write the screenplay out of thin air. You read all the Mozart's letters. You read anything about Mozart. And you used it as a springboard to a theatrical vision. Well, now you have to let me to do the same thing with your play. I am using your play, and we will use it as a springboard for another vision, film vision, which is makes every author very nervous. Why to change a word which was already very successful in the book or on the stage? No, he just went ahead, jumped into the darkness of changing a lot of things. And that was my luck, that he was daring to do that. And I am very thankful to him because it was the best collaboration I ever had with a writer, with Peter Schaffer.
Was F. Murray Abraham your first choice?
F. Murray Abraham, for the role of Salieri, it was a little bit by accident. I never saw him in any, which was, that was his luck. Because probably I would not even call him for audition, because the film which I saw later was awful. No, he was reading for the part of Director Rosenberg. It's a small part in the film, And after him was coming one young man to read for Mozart. But I didn't have anybody to read, Salieri. So I asked F. Murray Abraham if he can stay a few more minutes and helped me to read Mozart and read Salieri to him. And it was very interesting, because he knew suddenly that this is not the part he's fighting for. So he was wonderful. Suddenly he was not nervous at all. He was just reading Salieri, and Salieri became so real and alive, And so I said, listen, this is great. If you can do this like this, so I would fight for you to become Salieri. And it was a fight because, every major star wanted to be in the film, to play Salieri. It was enormous. And he didn't believe me. I told him, listen, wait, I have to convince, people that I want you to play the part, Mozart, that was a different story, Tom Hulce, because Mozart, I wanted to be unknown face, because I wanted people to see Mozart and not XY actor, how he plays Mozart, But Salieri could have been a big star, So I will fight for you. He didn't believe me. He accepted part in another movie. So when I finally said, I want Salieri to be F. Murray Abraham, so we couldn't use him. But Solzhenitsyn, Peter Schaffer, they were very, very smart. They said, no, we'll wait, because he's really right on. So that's how he got the part, F. Murray Abraham.
You must have been surprised by its success.
By?
Its success.
I was surprised. You must realize one thing. It's no one major studio wanted to finance the film and didn't finance the film. Because, period piece about a composer, costumes. Who wants to see that? So Solzhenitsyn put together the financing from different sources, and we all were, all the major studios, they must understand something if they don't believe in this project. So deep down we had doubts, but thanks God, you know. It's no. What was wonderful was that we decided that really the main character of the film will be the music, Mozart's music, and that was a good decision, you know.
You've obviously directed some landmark performances of Jack Nicholson and Big Nurse in Cuckoo's Nest, F. Murray Abrahams, Tom Hulce.
Yeah.
Woody Harrelson's outstanding performance in Larry Flint, which got a lot of critical backlash. Do actors expect some magic spell from you now, and what is your approach with them?
With I look, I got a screenplay, People vs. Larry Flint, and Ixtlan Productions. Usually, when I get a screenplay, I read at least 25 pages. If it doesn't grab me, you know, I put it aside. This one, I didn't even open, put it aside. Because Larry Flint, the only connection with name Larry Flint was pornography. So why they are sending me pornographic film? Then my agent is calling me. He said, "Did you read the script?" I said, "No, I will not." "You should, Milos, as a courtesy to Oliver Stone." I said, "Oliver Stone? What is Oliver Stone?" "No, he's a producer. Ixtlan Production, that's Oliver Stone." But his name was not there, so I didn't know. So I read the script and I realized it's a wonderful, wonderful screenplay. And it's not about pornography at all. It's about pornographer. And what it is about is much more important than what he is doing, than pornography, you know. So, yes, I want to do the film, now to cast. So, I never met, I wanted Bill Murray, because I never saw Woody Harrelson in a movie. I saw him in one, and it was very forgettable movie, you know. But Bill Murray had some personal problem. He never even returned my phone calls. So they said, "Meet Woody Harrelson." Okay, arranged meeting at the Four Seasons Hotel in Los Angeles. And I come to the hotel, I was a little late, and I see a commotion there in the lobby, and there is this guy wildly riding a wheelchair. And it was Woody, because they have wheelchairs for their guests if need be. And so he grabbed the wheelchair and started to, around. So I, okay, Woody, let's have a dinner. And he was so impressive that I asked him to play the part. The problem was with Althea, because I did extensive readings and screen tests for Althea, for the girl. And it happened that I just fell in love with Courtney Love. But studio told me, no way. We will not, because she's, her, history of drugs and alcohol and wild behavior, no way. So I went to her and said, "Courtney, listen, I will fight for you to be in the film if you give me a word that you will not betray me, that you will behave." And she gave me her word in such a way that I trusted her. So I went back to the studio. Studio said, after a few days, they called me and said, "No, because we didn't find insurer. She's uninsurable. Nobody wants to insure her." Well, so I called a friend of mine in London, Lloyd's of London, and I found an insurance. Very, very expensive insurance, So they said, Columbia said, "No, we are not going to pay $1 million for it to insure Courtney Love." So Oliver Stone, Woody Harrelson, Michael Houseman, Courtney Love herself, and myself, we both put in $200,000 to insure her. And she kept her word. She stayed clean through the whole shooting, which was a nightmare for her. Because at the beginning, I shot in the sequence, from the beginning of the script to the end. At the beginning are scenes when Althea is clean, very nice girl. She shot the scenes when she was in withdrawal from drugs. I found her twice in the bathroom shaking like a leaf, vomiting and like that. And she was brilliant. Later, when she was already out of withdrawal and she was fine, then she had to play the drug addict, drugged Althea, then she had to play that. And it was so unfair because critics didn't like her very much. No, not that they didn't like her, but they said, "That's not acting, she's playing herself." No, it was all acting.
How do you get performances? I mean, what is your relationship with actors on the set?
Uh, the most important, there are two important things. The actor has to trust you, and the second important thing, not to talk too much to the actor. Because more you talk to the actor, more you confuse his or her head.
That simple.
That's all.
Okay.
You don't forget, they are not coming, like ignorant. Good actors make their homework, which is very often much more thorough than what you can invent about the character. They bring you some homework, and then it's just just to shape it a little bit here and there, and less you talk to them, more confidence they have.
So casting for you is pretty much the most important part.
Oh, that's the most important part. Most important. If you cast right, you don't have to talk to the actor anymore.
I'm going to jump way ahead to, because time is completely against us now, Goya's Ghosts. Why?
Why not? Why not? The film about Van Gogh was already made, so why not Goya?
Well, what was it about Francesco della Goya?
No, it was, I'll tell you, it was not really Goya. It's not a film about Goya. It's not a biography at all. It's a story about Lorenzo and Ines, and Goya is the third important, but just another character. But what is incredible is when you realize how history repeats itself mercilessly. When you see what's happening around this year 1800 in France and Spain, and you realize, my God, how many times the whole world says never again, and now we are living the same thing. Exactly the same thing is happening now. So that's mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. Napoleon, who is going to liberate Spain in the name of French Revolution. Napoleon brought to Spain liberté, égalité, fraternité. The first thing Napoleon did, he abolished Inquisition. Inquisition, which was hated by everybody. He clamped on the church. He took their properties. He got rid of the royal family. So all these progressive things, and look, it turned into total nightmare, where suddenly, because Napoleon didn't realize one thing, that 1/5 of the Spanish population in that time lived on charity. The moment Napoleon took money from the church, the charity was administered before only by the church. Suddenly there was no charity money at all. And suddenly the 1/5 of Spanish population didn't have anything to live on. So they went into the streets, started to loot, started to kill, and after 2 or 3 years, all the Spaniards said, we don't care if it's Napoleon or Carlos IV or Joseph, we don't care who is ruling us. Just give us order. Just let us leave the house without being afraid to be shot at. Just save our home from being looted. Give us water, clean water. That's happening today.
Why did you choose Stellan Skarsgård, a Swedish actor, to play the Spanish painter?
Because I wanted the Goya to be unknown face. I didn't want to see big star how he plays Goya. I wanted people to see Goya, and he was perfect. I did some screen tests with other people, even Spaniards, but he first of all he looks a little bit like Goya, and he was brilliant. He's one of the most subtle actors I ever worked with, Stellan. And Javier Bardem, of course, I wanted to work with him very much so. And of course, irony is that when I asked for a meeting, he thought that I want him to play Goya, But then I explained to him that I want him to play Lorenzo, which is much more interesting part. And he understood that, so he accepted that,
Natalie Portman.
And Natalie Portman, I didn't know her at all. But I saw her face on a cover of some fashion magazine, And I couldn't believe that face is exactly the same face as Milkmaid of Bordeaux, which is Goya's latest painting, last painting, before he died. And so I asked for a meeting. She was very, very, very impressive. You know, I was very impressed by her. And then I saw the film closer. I see she's good, so why not?
I'm being told to wrap up now. I'm going to have one quick question, which is from Goya's Ghosts, going back to your work in Czechoslovakia. In the 40 years, what have you learned?
What did I learn? What did I learn is that more you learn, less free you are. When you know nothing about filmmaking, filmmaking is easy. More you learn, more difficult it's becoming, you know. But no. It's first of all, and this is sort of silly to say, don't fight the technical progress. It's you know, I insisted to edit at the first time on the camera machine, you know. Well, it would be a disaster because these, you know, electronic machines today, it's so wonderful, you know. And so you learn these kind of things. Otherwise, no, there is no really difference. You learn certain things, like, for example, European film is more concentrating on stories from the reality of people's lives. American movies are fairy tales. Most, not all, but most American movies are fairy tales, which is, I think, given by the fact that American movies really started by immigrants at the beginning of 20th century, you know, around 1900. These immigrants from Europe coming to the United States, not knowing nothing. So all these films, when you see from this period, are showing Americans how they would like to be seen, not how they are. It's fairy tales, you know. And that's nice, because then you know, combine the reality with fairy tale way of telling stories, and it works.
We're done. Milos Forman, thank you.
Okay.